Welcome, everyone. This is Brian from Crowdwise. Today, I'm here with Paul Sieradzki from R3 Printing, CEO and founder. We wanted to take some time today to talk to a founder who's using equity crowdfunding to raise capital from the crowd. So if there's other founders or potential issuers out there, we're looking to share some of these lessons that Paul and his team have gone through, both from this campaign as well as some past campaigns. In addition, today, we're going to get into some details of R3 Printing as a business, learn more about the market and where they're at today. So I'll hand things over to you, Paul. To start out, why don't you give us an introduction of who you are, what R3 Printing is, and how you came to work on it?
Cool. Thanks, Brian. So my name's Paul Sieradzki. I'm founder and CEO of R3 Printing. We're an additive manufacturing startup that's building automated hardware for the 3D printed future. We're bringing the world high-performance 3D printing for mass manufacturing, custom 3D printed products at prices that can compete with mass production. So R3 Printing was born out of necessity. During my senior year of college, I was running a 3D printing service out of my dorm room to serve fellow students at Columbia. They were having trouble getting time on university printers, and I thought I would step in and fill that demand. So shortly after we set up our PayPal account, built a website, put our first ad on Craigslist, we were getting more orders than we can handle. And it was a lot of architecture students that needed last-minute models for their classes, and they were trying to avoid late nights spent making them by hand. Soon enough, we're getting orders from like NYU, Parsons, Fashion Institute of Technology, basically all of Manhattan and parts of Jersey. And even after we scaled up our operation, after I graduated, we realized that even industrial 3D printers or enterprise-grade 3D printers were designed as high-end tools for the office. They weren't really building blocks with which you can build a scalable on-demand manufacturing business. So once it became clear that we'd never be able to scale efficiently and maintain a sufficiently acceptable profit margin at the price point that we were trying to achieve, which is to make 3D printing accessible to everyone, we decided to start a new chapter and solve the problems that were holding our business back, and that's how R3 Printing came to be.
Awesome. So as a business, right, startups out there obviously have lots of options, from traditional angel to venture capital to equity crowdfunding. Can you maybe talk a little bit about why you and R3 Printing decided to go with equity crowdfunding as your form for raising capital?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first outside capital was more the traditional route. We raised as a company from Ocean, which is a tech accelerator in Cincinnati. They're pretty selective. They choose about 10 startups for every cohort. And in our cohort was a fellow hardware company in the oil and gas industry that just prior to the start of the program launched a campaign on Republic. And they had a great experience. And we knew at that point that equity crowdfunding was really new, but we saw the opportunity. We wanted to fuel our R&D, we wanted to file patents, we wanted to grow our team, we wanted to accelerate the company timeline and grow as a startup. And it's during our time on Republic that we kind of saw what equity crowdfunding was, which is kind of the future of early stage startup fundraising. We love that there's a sense of community. We love the fact that we can share the success of our startups and startups in general with ordinary people. But we also love that it gets the company out there. And it's a very understated benefit of equity crowdfunding. So obviously now we have a follow-on round with StartEngine, and we plan to keep crowdfunding as an integral part of the fundraising strategy for R3 Printing.
Awesome. So you kind of touched on, some of the potential benefits there with getting your name out there, the branding, the exposure. Can you talk about, given that you've gone through, one of these on Republic in the past and you have one now with StartEngine, maybe a little bit more of some of the pros and the cons for people who are out there and maybe not sure if equity crowdfunding is right for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggest pros, like I touched on, is that sense of community. So I know that these are intangible, but it's really important, and it's easy to think that in the world of startups or business that money is money. Dollars fuel growth, no matter where it came from, VC, crowdfunding, elsewhere. But there's evidence to support the contrary, right? You ask an investor what they look for in an early stage startup, and they see the team, the people running the company. But people are human beings, and startups aren't easy. So when you have that community rallying around you, where you share your milestones and people are, saying congratulations, they wish you success, they're happy to be a part of it. That's a huge help. As a lot of entrepreneurs know, it's a deeply psychological experience starting a company and trying to, build it into something bigger. Another big pro that I also touched on is awareness, right? When raising via venture capital, you're privately emailing out a pitch deck. You're pitching in closed door settings. So you can raise successfully and get all the way to a product launch without the world having ever heard your name. So you're at square one when you launch. And it's that social component that gets the company out there, that gets the product awareness out there. And it teaches you a lot that you wouldn't really know otherwise. That last pro can also be a con depending on how you approach it. So for hardware startups, one of the important considerations is protecting your intellectual property, right? Can people copy your physical product, right? You can't just really copy code as easily as a physical product because it's just out there in the open for all to see. So when equity crowdfunding, you need to take into consideration that everything you're putting out there is public. There's not that inherent confidentiality when you're talking to a VC. But for us, the pros outweigh the cons for sure. We believe in the long-term viability of equity crowdfunding, and we're happy to be on these platforms and sharing our success with our early investors.
Awesome. So I think another thing that's probably going through a lot of the founders, the startups out there who are considering equity crowdfunding is there's so many options, right? There's all these different funding portals. Can you maybe briefly just talk to your experience? What are some of the things that people should look for when considering where to raise capital? And then if you're willing to, maybe talk about your experience on both Republic and StartEngine and some of the differences you've seen so far.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things to look for is obviously the size of the platform, both in terms of deal flow and dollars raised. You're going to try to strike that balance. You don't want a platform that's overcrowded, but not to, the dollar raised per company wind up being low. There's also something to look for in whether the platform curates its startups. What do they look for? Do they have a specific focus? For example, if there's a tech focus, or if there's a social component to the companies that they let on. Those are all important considerations. You kind of need to take into account who you are as a founder, and what your company does, and try to find something that's aligned to what you to who you are and who your company is. We absolutely loved raising on Republic. They do have a little bit of that curation where they try to include startups that aren't necessarily pure tech. We absolutely love that, and we absolutely love all the ways that they give entrepreneurs access to the investors, and you can interact with them. It's more than just the comment section. There's investor groups. When you post an update, investors can comment on that as well. It's not just kind of a one-way communication. We absolutely love that. On StartEngine, we're very thrilled with them as well. They have Reg A Plus capabilities, so that was kind of something that we saw as a natural next step in what a lot of companies do when they're raising via equity crowdfunding. They start with Reg CF, and then Reg A Plus winds up being the next step. So we want to explore that, and that's why we're on StartEngine right now.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. So thanks for, sharing all your experiences so far with equity crowdfunding. I'm sure it'll be really useful, to some of the founders and other people out there. Maybe let's shift the conversation a little bit and talk a little bit about your business and, the specifics of 3D printing, additive manufacturing industry. So to start out, there's a lot going on in the world today, right? With kind of the coronavirus epidemic and everything else going on. Can you maybe talk to just, either that specifically or world trends in general? And what is some of the potential opportunities where, 3D printing and additive manufacturing can kind of perhaps help with some of that?
Yeah. So we're seeing something very interesting right now with the coronavirus in, the goodwill of local entrepreneurs or hobbyists stepping in and 3D printing supplies, things like ventilator valves, entire ventilators themselves based off of materials that hospitals might otherwise have laying around, the face masks for just personal protection equipment for the people on the front line. And we're really, it's a heartwarming thing to witness, and it highlights something bigger, which is the agility of 3D printing as a manufacturing technology. Companies that have access to 3D printing during this pandemic and in the future would be able to pivot overnight, essentially, from manufacturing one thing to being able to manufacturing something completely different. That kind of turnaround is almost impossible in any other technology, right? Let's say injection molding, a very popular mass manufacturing technology. You have to design the mold, you have to CNC the mold, you have to prep the machine in order to inject the plastic in various places. The lag time from being able to pivot from the moment you knew about the need to pivot to the time that you're having a new output from your manufacturing line is way longer in those technologies. So we're seeing a lot of stakeholders in various industries take notice, from college universities to the Air Force. So there's virtually countless possibilities for where 3D printing technology can be applied. It's basically just a matter of how it gets implemented in any particular vertical and industries.
Awesome. Maybe we could explore that a little more. So, I come from the aerospace defense industry, mechanical engineering background, so could definitely see some of the applications there. Can you maybe share, say over the next 5 to 10 years, what do you think are some of the most exciting potential applications and or industries, and kind of what does that future maybe look like?
Yeah, so like you touched on, aerospace is a big one. Things that need to be stiff, strong, but also as light as possible because they need to move. Automotive as well. So you're seeing additive manufacturing being rapidly adopted for those exact reasons. They can make the same part at least as stiff, if not stiffer, but sometimes orders of magnitude lighter, and that's driving a lot of adoption. I think what's really exciting to me and to a lot of viewers and investors in equity crowdfunding is all the ways that additive manufacturing is going to enter their homes and their daily lives. So think about everything in your life that you kind of touch, everything that's a touch point that you use that's mass manufactured, and think about the ways that could be customized. I'm an engineer just like you, so I'm sure you use a computer mouse a lot when doing your modeling. Imagine a 3D printed ergonomic mouse, or to take it a step further, all those who have prosthetics. Those people are acutely aware of what a price ceiling can do to the quality of a product, what custom can get you in terms of the comfort and feel and the value in your life versus something that's off the shelf. And the power of additive manufacturing and what we're building at R3 Printing, we're here to smash that price ceiling. We're trying to get mass customization, if you will, into the doors of everyone's lives.
Awesome. So maybe let's talk a little bit more about IP, intellectual property. You guys, I believe, have a lot of patents, right? Or at least provisional or maybe pending, but can you talk about both from your a founder's perspective, what are some of the things that you have to think about in terms of intellectual property? And for maybe any potential investors who are watching this, what does that mean for them? What are some of the important things to think about when you're assessing a company and looking at intellectual property rights?
Absolutely, yeah. So at R3 Printing, we have 1 granted patent and we have 4 patents pending. And these are full-blown utility patents, including the pending ones, obviously, are full-blown utility patents. They're not provisionals. So from an investor's perspective, if you're new to patents, there's 2 different categories. There's design patents that protect kind of the look of a product, and there's a utility patent that protects the way it actually works. And then within those patent categories, there's a provisional application, which you can think of it as a bookmark. The patent office kind of receives applications in a certain order and they review applications in that order. A provisional patent lets you kind of bookmark your place, and then perhaps it's limited in scope. You need to work with a skilled attorney or be very knowledgeable, but you can fill in the blanks of your patent application later to bring it up to standard. So from a founder's perspective, especially in the world of hardware, it's about finding a balance between moving forward and innovating and inventing the things that necessitate a patent in the first place, but also protecting all the valuable intellectual property that came from that hard work. So protecting your innovations with patents does 2 things. First and foremost, it's a deterrent for competitors that might seek to copy your product. And second of all, it gives you the opportunity to license. So let's say there's an invention and there's another company that wants to use it for something that maybe doesn't directly compete with you, but you wouldn't have the resources yourself to pursue that, that vertical in the market. You can generate revenue for yourself through licensing. So I guess the takeaway is, IP is valuable. If you're a hardware startup and you invest in innovating, and then you also invest in protecting your IP, that's something that investors can look for and try to weigh that against the valuation cap that you're asking for. And sometimes companies get acquired for intellectual property alone, or at least during acquisitions, that's a big component of it. So when investors are keeping an eye on exit events, which is obviously how they generate a return on their investment, IP can play a big part in both the share price at an IPO, as well as the valuation at the time of an acquisition. So they're important considerations to keep in mind.
That's really helpful. Thanks for sharing that. Maybe, I think I'd be interested, as I'm sure others would be, in hearing more about your patents and your technology. Can you talk about some of those? And then maybe, how do you differentiate yourself? 3D printing, obviously very competitive. What's the competitive landscape look like, and how are you guys differentiating your business?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we'll talk about first the company, how we're different, and then the exact ways that we implemented that.
Perfect.
So as I said before, we're bringing manufacturing grade 3D printing. We want our products, so our 3D printer, to be a factory grade 3D printer designed for businesses that offer 3D printing services for a profit. Also called on-demand manufacturing. So these are people similar to how you think like Google or Amazon operate a data center and they provide cloud services for a fee. These are businesses that, let's say you're a design engineer, but you don't have access to equipment yourself. You provide them with a file, and for a price, they will manufacture it for you. These people require speed. The more parts that they can print in a day, the more revenue that they can generate. They also require reliability, right? If your machines are constantly breaking, there's going to be an additional human overhead that keeps your prices high, which, if a competitor can be more efficient, won't allow you to compete. And you also want to offer as many materials as possible, right? Not all plastics are made the same. Some are more stiff and are resistant to bending. Others are more resistant to high temperatures. Some are lighter, some are heavier, or have magnetic properties. We're seeing a lot of 3D printing materials that have metal infused into them. So you need that versatility, you need the speed, and you need the reliability, and that's what we're offering for our customers. One of the ways that we're doing that is through re-engineering the printhead. So in a typical 3D printer, the way it works is a three-dimensional object is printed by laying down two-dimensional layers of plastic. So you can picture a cylinder is composed of a series of circles stacked vertically on top of each other. The way that happens in our technology is through melting a single spool of plastic, extruding it through a nozzle, and kind of laying it down layer by layer with a printhead. This is I have with me here, this is a typical printhead of a 3D printer. So plastic material goes in here, there's two nozzles, and it passes through a motor, a cooling system, and ultimately a nozzle here that lays it down onto the print bed. So you can picture this going back and forth and forward and back as it lays down material. This is heavy, this is big as well. And that's an issue because when you're trying to print fast, the laws of physics dictate that you need to accelerate and decelerate. You can't stop on a dime. There's momentum involved. So to solve that, we tried to create a printhead that's as small and light as possible. So for comparison, if you have a typical 3D printer printhead, this is ours. So much smaller, much lighter by consequence, through a couple of patent pending innovations that allow our printer to print bigger. So within the same confines of printer, if you picture a cube, our printer can print almost as big as itself, kind of a one-to-one print ratio to print size to printer ratio, and as well as speed. You can picture the acceleration, deceleration of this thing versus the acceleration, deceleration of this thing. It's almost twice as fast depending on the printer that you compare ourselves to. So that's one of the patents that we have going on here. It's actually a few parts. So one is now in the process of being published. There are a few child applications that aren't necessarily published yet, but a big component of that is in our print head and how much smaller and lighter we made it.
So one quick question on that, maybe before you move on to some of your other stuff. The first thing I would think is, maybe you could make this interchangeable or replaceable. Like, are you designing it with a certain printer in mind? Do you have to use your printer? Do you maybe have thoughts about making it more of like a modular thing? What are your thoughts around how it might be used in the future?
Mm-hmm. So those are questions we've been asked in the past, and we've definitely explored. One of the big issues in 3D printing is a lack of standardization. So, unlike, let's say, PCs, where there's a standard socket for Intel chips, so you can build your own PC with, the components that you need, whether you're looking for graphics power or processing power, or if you're just doing a data server for storage, lots of, hard drive or solid state storage. You can customize the parameters you need and then, add in the components as needed. In 3D printing, that couldn't be further from the truth. Some printers use round rods. Some printers use T-shaped rods, which is what we're doing for stiffness purposes. And there's no real way for us to be able to create a print head that can easily slot into most printers. And on top of that, there's other optimizations, not just the print head, but within the printer that we optimized in order to be able to maximize the build volume within the confines of the printer itself. So it's definitely something that we explored. It didn't look viable at the time. However, like per my previous point with patent licensing, we wouldn't be opposed if someone wanted to license out the technology if they had some type of unique implementation that they wanted to pursue. We'd be open to that conversation.
Got it. Awesome. Any other interesting IP you want to talk about?
Unfortunately, not publicly.
Okay. Save it for a future discussion.
Yes.
Awesome. So, I think one thing that I'm curious about is, where are you guys today in the product development life cycle? What are you currently looking at, and kind of what's the roadmap for this year look like for you?
Yeah, so right now we're in what's called the design for manufacture / design for assembly stages of product engineering. So for those unfamiliar with hardware, when you're kind of iterating and prototyping, there's, you design things, kind of as you go along and as you progress, not necessarily taking into account the way things are done in the factory, which can sometimes be very different in the ways things are manufactured and assembled as one-off prototypes. So right now we're going back and revising the design of our print head, of our chassis, etc., to make them either cheaper to manufacture at the factory, or in the case of the chassis, also cheaper to assemble. So right now, our last generation chassis was stainless steel. We're redesigning it to not only be a thinner gauge, but also in aluminum. So it's lighter, so that saves us in shipping, but it also is going to save us about 25% in manufacturing costs without any sacrifice of performance or durability. And it's kind of similar changes along our product line that we're trying to make sure that R3 printing, once we launch, we not are just generating revenue, but we're becoming profitable, and we don't have any issues at scale.
Okay, so what does once you're looking to launch, what's that kind of go-to market capture strategy look like?
Yep. So our target market, we're going to start in the U.S. and Canada, which, according to the research on the market, is the biggest single slice of additive manufacturing technology in the world. There's other countries, Europe and Asia, that follow, but our market segment is the single biggest one, which is great for us because we're located in the U.S. We're also going to first target on-demand manufacturers. So once again, those are the businesses that offer 3D printing services as their primary means of revenue. So we're going to start there because those customers are the most eager to upgrade to our technology because right now they're using these, enterprise grade 3D printers that are great for high-end offices and, prototyping and engineering firms, but not necessarily, factory profit generating machines. So we're going to start with those customers and saturate that market. After that is when we will also pursue universities, engineering firms, those types of businesses that heavily use additive manufacturing and have that either part of their, business, or they just use it heavily within their own internal processes. For example, larger companies that need additive manufacturing internally, but don't necessarily sell it as a service. Those tend to be a little bit more complex in terms of, their, signing the deals. For example, universities, they require support contracts, et cetera. That's, a lot of legal lift for a startup to just try to pursue off the bat. So we're going to save that for once we're mature. We've, captured a market segment that makes us stable in terms of our own revenue generation. And you're going to see that in 2021 when we launch our product.
Awesome. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, Paul, and I know we're coming up on things. Maybe before we say our goodbyes, is there anything else you want to share?
No, not really. I mean, I would love to encourage, any prospective investors, definitely check out our StartEngine page. Ask us any questions that you want to ask. And to any fellow entrepreneurs out there who are watching this, absolutely feel free to connect with us all the same. Find us through our website, email, our LinkedIn's. We're absolutely happy to help a fellow entrepreneur learn about equity crowdfunding and see, if there's a chance that they can use that incredible tool to launch their business and similarly, allow people to share in their success as well. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for your time, Paul. I want to say thank you, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thanks, Brian.